I don't agree that it was an overdose because of the fact that he took one pill. And I don't think you can overdose on one pill, or at least that's what I used to think. I don't think that anymore, now that I know the reality of fentanyl and what it does to people. Skylar was my firstborn, so I have nicknames for my children. I have three of them, and Skylar was my teacher because I was 19 years old when I had him, and I did not know how to be a mom, so he taught me how to be a mom. He was born on January 7th of 1983, and that many years ago, which has been 42 years, to name a boy Skylar was not a popular thing to do. I got so much flack for naming him Skylar, but in reality, his name was perfect for him. You know, it was just, he was my mythical, magical kid. You know, he was full of energy and he loved life, and the name Skylar fit him really well. He was just an amazing kid. I used to laugh when he was little because his eyes were so big in his head that he couldn't close his eyelids all the way. And so when I'd have a babysitter and they'd go in and he'd be asleep and his eyes would be rolled back and his eyelids weren't open, it would freak them out. And he eventually grew into his eyes. So, but yeah, it was. And I used to tease him because he died at 36. I used to tease him because he had all these wrinkles around his eyes and his mouth because he always had the biggest smile and his eyes were so large that it wrinkled his face. And I said, son, you're 30 years or 19 years younger than me and you have more wrinkles than I do. But it was because of his expression on his face was so amazing. He always smiled. It was great. That's one of my best memories of him is his smile. Skylar was I referred to him as my unicorn because he was so mythical and magical. But with that mythical, magical sense of his, he was an adrenaline junkie. He loved to do crazy things. He would BMX. He was a trampoline artist. He was, you know, he did the craziest things he could possibly do. One time he wrecked his motorcycle and I found out about it because he posted on Facebook a picture of him getting wheeled on to a helicopter going like this, "Hey mom." So that was my kid. He had a lot of adrenaline, and unfortunately 4 years before he died, he had injured himself pretty severely from his adrenaline. And he had compound fractured his tibia, fibia, and needed, what are they called, the titanium rods down his leg. And so because of that, his orthopedic surgeon had told him that he couldn't do a lot of the adrenaline things he wanted to do anymore. Because had he broke that leg again and broke that tib rod, he would lose his leg. And so it took away all of that excitement in his life. So he ended up getting really depressed about that. He would call me and he'd say, "Mom, I'm having a really bad day." And I'd talk to him and, you know, so he said, "Maybe it's time for you to get on some meds for your anxiety." And so the last time I had a conversation with him, he had called me from work the night before and asked me if he could come over because he was ready to get on some meds. And I said, okay. So he came over on Friday, and Friday the 11th of January. 2019, and we had this long conversation. I called my doctor, set up an appointment for him to come in and talk to him, and everything was good. He was going to go in on February 1st to get his appointment, to get on some meds to try to calm down his anxiety. And Saturday afternoon, I had a sheriff show up at my house. And he was informing me that my son had passed away. And I initially had thought that it was on his motorcycle because this was a contention point between us, was his motorcycle, you know. And I asked, well, you know, that kind of news, you go to your knees. You know, there is no not reacting to that. And I asked what had happened, and they initially had thought that he had committed suicide. And I said, why would you think that? Did he shoot himself? Did what? And they said, well, there was drugs involved. And I had questioned that because I knew that my son, well, at least as a mother who thought she knew her son, he wasn't doing drugs. He was smoking marijuana, which in our state is legal, and I knew that. He also worked for a government contract company that would regularly test him. So I knew there wasn't any heavy drugs on board, so I wasn't quite sure what had happened. So I did a lot of research into what had happened and it demanded a lot of answers from the coroner, from the department, or the police department, you know, that kind of stuff, and found out that it was a fentanyl overdose. And how that had come about was he was having an anxiety attack that night, and instead of calling me, which he normally did because it was late and he knew I had to work, he went ahead and went out in his apartment complex and contacted somebody in his apartment complex, and they gave him what he thought or what was told to him were I think they were Xanax. And one of them was still sitting on his table, and one was gone. So he took one of the pills, and his girlfriend found him on the floor the next morning, dead, because she was at work that night, and he had died many hours earlier. I don't know exact time, but it was kind of funny because, we're right after Christmas that year. It was Christmas 2018, and then he died in January 2019. So my kids, I have 3 of them, my kids had all bought me a Ring camera for my doorbell. And so we'd set it up, but not many people come to my home and ring the doorbell. Most everybody just comes in, So my daughter and I were away just out and about doing some errands, and my Ring camera went off, and I'm like, oh, yay, my Ring camera finally went off. So I answered it, and when I clicked on it, it was a sheriff standing there. And I thought, oh my gosh, what is going on? Because at that point in time in my life, I was going through a really nasty divorce, and I thought, oh, my ex-husband's pulling something. And so I answered it, and I told the sheriff I wasn't home, but I'd come right home. And he said, yes, could you come right home? I'll wait for you. And I said, okay. So we came home, and I approached the sheriff when I pulled up, and he said, are you Robin Holliday? And I said, yeah, and asked who my daughter was. And I told him, he says, can we go in the house and talk? And I said, yeah, sure. So we go in the house, and we're talking, and he said, do you have a son named Skyler Pope? And I knew instantly that he was gone. And my daughter just stood there looking. She was 19 years old at the time. And she just stood there looking at me because I'm screaming, no. And the sheriff helped me up. And then I called my family and had them come over immediately. That kind of shock is you don't go right into detective mode. You go into, I want to crawl in my bed and never come out. And I did that for probably 6 months. I did. I was devastated. Like I said, I was going through I'd been married for 25 years, going through a horrible divorce. And now all of a sudden my son's dead. And, there was just so much going on. And so after about 6 months, my other 2 children said, Mom, we gotta get up. We gotta do stuff, and stuff. And so I did. And that's when I decided I gotta find out more about this, because in the process, in that 6 months, I was hearing from a detective, I was hearing from the coroner, I was hearing all these little bits and pieces of information, and I kept asking, is anybody going to get charged with his death? Is anybody going to be, is there going to be something done about this? Are you going to try to find who sold this drug? And they're like, well, no, that's going to be impossible. They're just drug dealers. And, we're going for the big guys. And my thoughts at that time when I was told that when it was just completely closed, finished, and I was told that was, okay, back in the 80s, yeah, I can see that we were going after the big guys because we wanted to stop the flow of the cocaine and the drugs and stuff. But nowadays, these kids are taking one pill and it's killing them. We got to stop it where it starts, which is the dealer. And so I was pretty upset about that and decided that I needed to be an advocate for these kids. And so I did everything I could to find out as much information on fentanyl, watched as much real information, not necessarily the stuff that people just throw out there on the internet, but I was really researching. And one of my biggest things when I got my son's toxicology report was what was in his system that killed him. And there was 14 grams of cocaine, and then there was 27, or not grams, 14 nanograms of cocaine and 27 nanograms of fentanyl. A jelly bean, a regular jelly bean, weighs anywhere between 1 and 2 billion nanograms. So for me, I could go, wow, 1 or 2 billion, depending on the size of that jelly bean, and he died from 27 of those nanograms. His daughter's birthday was the next day. I know that wasn't his intention. If he'd have known that this could possibly kill him, he'd have never taken it. His children were his life, and now they're without his dad, without their dad. That's when I decided that the world needs to know that one pill can kill these kids, and it does all the time. I had a lot of information given to me from the coroner, the Mesa coroner, because I wanted to know how were his organs, when you did the autopsy, how were his organs, what were the other drugs found in his system. I wanted to know all of that. I wasn't being a naive mother. I wanted to know, did I miss that he was a drug addict and could have done more? Because I was blaming myself. Had I missed that, how could I have helped him to not get to that point? But I didn't miss it because it wasn't there. There was no long-term history of drugs in his system. There was no organ damage from drugs in his system. He was a very healthy 6'3", 185-pound young man, you know, who was 36 years old, went to the gym 3 or 4 times a week, and, you know, was a little bit crazy with his adrenaline, but that was about it. And so that's when I decided that the world needs to know that one pill can kill these kids, and it does all the time. I take the week off of between January 7th and January 12th every year, because that's the week that my son not only would celebrate his birthday, but now we're celebrating his death date in that 1 week. And that is the week that on his birthday on the 7th, I celebrate him. I love him. I celebrate him. We get family together. We do all these fun things. We, memorialize him. We take out pictures and artwork and stuff like that. And then on the 12th is the day that I mourn him every year. And something that my family and I do is my son was crazy about water. He loved water, again, the adrenaline junkie. So he'd come to my house and he'd get on the roof and he'd run off the roof and he'd jump in my pool. And after he broke his leg and I'd catch him doing that, I'm like, oh, child, if you break that leg, we're going to lose it, and that's going to be devastating. And so our thing that we do every year is on the 12th, on his death date, is we gather as a family and we jump into the pool, and we call it the Pope Plunge for my son, Skylar, because his last name was Pope. And it is cold. It is freezing because I don't have a heated pool. But that's what we do, and we just reach out to him and let him know. And the funny thing is I had another foster child who had died 20 years ago, and so I knew what the death of a son was, and he would come back to me in these little things of, he was a crow, he loved crows, and so I'd see these crazy crows coming around, right? And then on the 12th, after the funeral, the funeral was on the 16th, but after the funeral, I was sitting in my backyard with my family, and I always have this one crow that comes around. And this crow came around, but also this big hawk came around. And normally those two don't like each other when they're together. These guys were just swooping and flowing out the back and stuff. And I was going, oh my God, that's Skylar and Joey together. They're together again. Because Skylar was supposed to be with Joey that day that Joey died, and he didn't go. So I know they're together. I know that they're with each other and stuff. So I love that. And I tell my family this, and my family goes, Robin, I don't know. But they seen this. They seen this too. So about 2 years ago, my sister was here visiting with her wife, and we were sitting outside and we were talking about Skylar, and they were having a couple beers because I don't drink. I'm 36 years sober. And so they were having a couple beers, and we were sitting outside talking, and all of a sudden, this huge hawk flies up and sits on one of my fence posts. And I said, oh my God, Skylar's here. And my sister's back was to him, and she turned around and she goes, oh my God, you do see him. And I said, all the time, all the time. So I truly believe in that. And that gives me a lot of pleasure, knowing that that's something that I can look forward to. And whenever it seems like I need him, I'll see him, and I feel him all the time. And so I deal with it a lot better. You never forget that pain. You never can explain that pain, but you definitely learn how to live with that pain and try to remember just the positive things and then look forward to the positive things. And so that's where I'm at today. Yeah. And it is sad that we are not doing more about this. It's just sad that our country isn't in an uproar, because parents, family members, people in general have this misconception that their kids it's never going to happen to their kids. Don't assume anything with your children. I don't care how old they are. Don't assume anything. When you feel like your child is hurting or you feel like there's an issue, go the extra mile. Go that extra step to make sure that you understand the depth of their depression or the depth of their anxiety. Don't just brush it off like, oh, you'll be fine. The rest of us parents who are out here, we feel for you. We understand what you're going through. We understand the anger, and we love you, and we experience the death of our child every time one of your guys dies. And I think that's true for most of us. I think it is. I have to enjoy the rest of my life, and I know that's what he wants. He doesn't want me to be sad forever, and I'm still sad. I still have days where I'm like, oh my God. But for the most part, I try to find happiness and health and stuff. So I have to go on for my other kids. I've got grandchildren. I have to go on for them, and I have to be Skylar's voice. That's the one thing that he doesn't have anymore that I have to be for him. So that's my goal.